Today we're going to be painting our very own dinosaur. As always, I'm going to be talking you through exactly what I've got in front of me. I'll be showing you what brushes I'm using, what paint colours I'm using, and what kind of canvas I'm using as well. But please feel free to change up your colours for this painting. You can change the type of dinosaur that you're doing as well if you want to. Today I'm going to be painting a Brachiosaurus dinosaur, but you can do a T-Rex or any other dinosaur that you like. Before we jump into our painting, I'm going to just talk you through what I've got in front of me. I have a stretched canvas here. This is just stretched on some wood at the back, and the size is 8 by 10, but you can use any size canvas that you like. You can do a really small one, really big one, and if you haven't got a canvas, don't worry, you can always use a piece of paper or card instead. I have a few different size brushes here. I might not need all of them, but I like to just have them on standby just in case. So I have a bigger one which has got a square top, a kind of smaller square shaped brush, a medium pointy shape, and then a tiny little pointy shaped brush. I also have here a black felt tip pen. Now if you don't want to use a pen and you'd like to stick with paint, you can just use paint for this, or if you haven't got a felt tip, you can use any other pen that you like. I have a glass of water just for washing off the brushes, and we're also going to be adding a little bit of water into our paint just to keep our paint nice and fluid and fresh. I have a kitchen towel. This is just for dabbing the brushes on, and if you have any excess paint on your brush, you can just dab it off on the kitchen towel as well. And then over here in my paint palette, I have an array of different paint colours. So I've got two little dishes of white paint, just because I'm going to be using the white paint quite a lot with this painting. I have some blue, green, yellow, and orange. Like I've mentioned before, you can use any paint colours that you like. You don't have to follow along with me. You can have an experiment, you can change up the painting. And the great thing about this painting is you can do it a number of different times and have a whole family of dinosaurs, all with different coloured backgrounds and all with different coloured dinosaurs. So to begin with, we're going to create our first colour. So the first colour we're going to create will be the main colour of the body of our dinosaur. And then what we'll do is we'll use our small brush and we'll just draw in this shape, and we'll do it together. I'll talk you through the shape nicely, but we're just going to use this kind of colour of our dinosaur, almost like a pen or a pencil, just to sketch out that outline. So to start with, I'm just going to pick up this size brush. So it's kind of a small square shaped brush. And I'm going to be using this just to mix up my paint. I don't want to use too much of a small brush for this, just because it's easier to mix up more paint with a slightly bigger brush. The first thing I recommend doing is just dipping it in the water. Just tap it at the base of your cup just to loosen up those bristles. And then you can just give it a little dab on your kitchen towel. Moving over to my paint palette, and if you haven't got a paint palette, don't worry, you can just use a ceramic palette from the kitchen. The paint will come off nicely with some warm soap and water, so you can just wash it off afterwards, especially if you're using acrylic paint, because it is water-based. So to start with, I'm going to scoop up a couple of scoops of my white paint, just as my base. I want to make a lighter shade of blue for the base of my dinosaur, and I want to make sure I'm mixing up enough paint, so that's why I'm picking up 2 or 3 scoops of my white. Very much depends how big your canvas is. If you're doing it on a huge canvas, you're going to need some more paint. I'm then going to pick up some blue because I want my dinosaur to be blue, and I'm just going to mix it in with this white. Now, the lovely thing about mixing up your colours is you can decide what shade you want it to be. If you want it to be lighter and a little bit more pastel in shade, you just need more white. And if you want it to be a little bit darker, you can just continue to add in a little bit more blue as you go. So this is the colour that I'm going to use for the main part of the dinosaur, but then I'm going to be creating a darker shade of blue to add in some of the details on the dinosaur's back. So I want this shade to be a little bit lighter than the colour that I'm going to use and make later. And remember, you don't have to follow along with the colours I'm making. As long as you're happy with your colours, that's really all that matters. So once you've given your colour a good mix, we're just going to move over to our water, and I'm just going to add a couple of drops of water into this paint and really mix it in. Because I'm using acrylic paint today, I just want to keep that paint nice and fluid. Acrylic paint dries nice and quickly, but we just want to make sure that it's not drying too quickly and we can use it nicely. Once you're happy, we can then just pop our brush down onto the kitchen towel and we can move over to one of our smaller brushes. So with this smaller brush, I'm just going to dip it in water again, just to loosen up the bristles like we did last time. And we're just going to use this colour to sketch in our dinosaur. So remember that we're painting something that's nature. These are alive, they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Each dinosaur is different and unique, just like we are. So don't worry if it's a bit wobbly and not neat, just go with it. It just creates character in your dinosaur. So the first shape we're going to start with is the dinosaur's head. So this is a little bit like an oval shape or a little bit like an egg shape on the side. So I'm just going to decide where I want it to go. Because this dinosaur has quite a long neck, I just want to allow enough space to have the nice long neck coming down here, the rest of the canvas. And I want to allow a little bit of space at the top. So I think I'm going to place my head roughly around here. And I'm going to start slightly smaller because we can always make it bigger. But I'm just doing almost like an egg shape or an oval shape on its side. Take your time, there's no rush with this. Again, I would always start a little bit smaller because we can always make it bigger if you want to. So there I have a very rough sort of shape with my oval. And now I'm just going to change the shape slightly. I want to make it a little bit more round. So I'm keeping this area slightly more curved, and then I'm going to make this area a little bit more round, just like an egg. An egg that's lying on its side. As soon as you're happy with your shape, you can just go ahead and fill it in. Fill it in with the same colour paint. What I like to do now is take a step back and have a little look at my painting. This is where you're going to really get a sense of how big your dinosaur is going to be on the page. So if you wanted to make it a little bit bigger, now's your chance. You can just take a little bit more paint and just keep following that line you've already created, but you're just making it a little bit bigger if you want to. If you're happy with the shape of the head, then pop down the paintbrush and step away from the canvas. The next step we're going to move on to, whenever you're ready, is drawing in the dinosaur's neck. So this sort of curves around a little bit, it's thinner at the top, and then it goes a little bit thicker as we get down to the base of the canvas where the body is going to be. So I'm just going to start at the back area of the head, and I'm just going to use a very light touch with my paintbrush. I'm just going to swirl it around, bring it in a little bit like a giraffe's neck, and then it's going to curve round and down as we get to the base of our canvas, almost coming down to that corner. Remember, don't worry if your lines are wobbly or if they're not neat, they really don't need to be. The next line we're going to do is the other side of the dinosaur's neck. So we don't want to bring this too far out because we want its head to kind of sit outwards. So I would kind of make it a little bit thinner, and you can always make it thicker if you want to afterwards. This isn't going to curve as much, it's just going to sort of calm down. And then you might see a little curve as you reach the base of the canvas. Just kind of like that. What we're now going to do is we're going to fill in this area, and then if we want to change the shape a little bit or make it a little bit bigger, we can. So if you want to, you can swap back over to your bigger brush just so you can fill in some more of the surface area. I'm just picking up some of the same colour paint. I'm just going to carefully fill in this gap all the way from the head down to the bottom of the canvas. You might also feel like you want to do 2 layers of paint. And if you do want to do 2 layers of paint, I just recommend waiting for the first layer to dry before you go ahead and add the second coat. Only because when you add wet paint on top of wet paint, sometimes it can just pull off the paint that's underneath, a little bit like an eraser. So if you want the paint to be really thick, just wait for it to dry. If you have a hairdryer handy, you can always use it on a medium heat just to speed up the process. Once you've filled in the body of the dinosaur, again, have a little step back and see if you want to change anything. I might just change this line here and just bring it down a little bit straighter rather than it curving too much. We're going to be adding more details onto the dinosaur's body and little details on the back as well. If you wanted to do 2 layers, this is where I would just recommend pausing the video, waiting for it to dry. You can then do another coat of paint afterwards if you want to. Dry it with a hairdryer and then do another coat, and then we can move on to the next bit. If you're happy, we can just move straight on to the next part. As soon as you've added however many layers you want to your dinosaur and it's nice and dry, we're now just going to move on and wash the 2 of our brushes. So we just want to give these a little tap on the base of your cup. This just helps lift off any of that excess paint. Now, it depends what colour you want to do your background. I'm going to be going for an orangey yellow colour for mine. So I might actually just wash up my brushes and change my water just so that I don't get any of this blue water in my lovely orange paint. But if you're going for a different colour blue or a purple or even a pink, you don't really have to change your water if you don't want to. Moving on to our background colour now, we're just going to spend a moment mixing up that shade. So for me, like I said, I'm going to go for an orangey yellow colour, but I still want it to be quite light in tone. So I'm going to start with some some white as my base, and then I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it and quite a lot of orange. And I'm going to give it a mix and just see what I come up with. Now, the nice thing about mixing your own paint colours is you can kind of control and create shades that you like. And remember, if ever you don't like a shade or a colour that you've made, you don't have to use it. You can always test it out on a blank piece of paper first. Just adding a little bit more yellow to this. And I might also add a little bit more white as well. So just enjoy mixing up your own colour now. I would just say make sure you're mixing up enough to cover the whole of your background. And if you are doing a couple of different layers with your painting, you just want to make sure you're definitely mixing up plenty. Just adding a little bit more yellow to this. Might add a little bit more orange as well. As soon as you're happy with the colour that you've made, we're just going to do the same thing as we did at the start and just add a little bit of water to this paint just to keep it nice and fluid and fresh. Then once you've added that water, really mix it in carefully. This is the fun bit, because all we're going to do is we're just going to paint this on the background. And this is up to you. You might want to be a little bit more choppy and thick with your paint for your background, or you might want to be nice and smooth. But all we want to do is we just want to be really careful as we bring our background colour up to meet our dinosaur. So what I like to do is just leave a little gap just between the colours, and then I'm going to come back to it later just using a really precise hand. So I kind of fill in the background. I'm careful as I get to where the dinosaur is. And if you are using a square brush like this, or any brush in fact, what's quite nice is if you push the bristles down a little bit hard on the canvas and then drag the paintbrush around, it gives you quite a nice crisp edge where the bristles fan out. So you can kind of give that a bit of an experiment. It's always really handy when it comes to painting any of our colour right up next to the dinosaur. So you can just bring your brush around, dragging it around. So push it down, drag it down, and it just gives you quite a nice crisp edge with your paint. So that might be something you want to practice. As you can see, I'm being quite choppy with how I'm applying the paint. I'm not being neat with it. If you are painting a canvas, you might also want to paint the sides and the top and the bottom. Completely up to you. Some artists like to paint the sides of their canvases, some choose not to. You can decide what kind of artist you want to be today. Once you've painted the background, whenever you're ready, we can then go ahead and carefully just fill in the little gap we've left between our background colour and the dinosaur. So again, like I said, you can always try that, dragging your paintbrush down to get a nice crisp line. And remember to take your time with this, there's no rush. You can always pause the video if you need to. And don't worry if you go over your line with the colour of your dinosaur, you can always wait for your background colour to dry and then you can go ahead and add a little bit more of your dinosaur colour over the top if you feel like you need to. You need to swap to a smaller brush just to get into any of the little gaps. Just swapping to my tiny brush just to get in under where the dinosaur's neck is. Next up, we're just going to give the brushes that we've used a really good wash in the water again. We're going to create the colour next, just to add a few little details and splodges and dots and lines on the back of our dinosaur. So you can choose any colour that you want with this. The one thing I would say is I would recommend either going really, really dark or really, really light, just so that it stands out against the background of your dinosaur. So for me here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mix up a really kind of light, I would say yellowy green colour, and I'm just going to add a few splodges along the back of my dinosaur. So I'm going to take my square brush, the slightly bigger one, and moving back over to my paint palette, I'm just going to mix up that colour now. So I'm going to start with some white, and then just going to add some green and a bit of yellow. I'm going to see what colour I get. So the white paint will really help this paint colour pop against the blue of my dinosaur. So I just want to make sure it's light enough. So I'm just going to add a little bit more white to it. Might also add a little bit more of the yellow, just to give it quite a bright green tone. Again, remember, you can use any colour that you want with this. You might just want to have a look at what colours you've already used and decide which one appeals to you. So once I'm happy with the colour, I'm actually not going to add water to it. I want to go in quite thick with this paint, just so it really stands out. So I'm going to move back over to one of my smaller brushes, whichever one you want. And I'm going to pick up quite a lot of this paint, so it's got quite a large amount on the end of my brush. And I'm just going to focus this towards sort of the back part of the dinosaur. And I'm just going to do little sort of dashes, just like this, quite thick with the paint, like a little line. I'm going to do this all the way along, sort of back. If you want to, you can always wait for it to dry and then add another layer on the top if you want to go in really thick with your paint. You might also add a few kind of going up towards the back of the head as well. They're going to be a little bit smaller on the head, just like this. It might even come off the end of the canvas as well. When you're happy with your paint splodges, we're going to give our brush another wash in the water. And we're now going to move on to creating the colour that we're going to use for the sort of details on the back of the dinosaur. So these are almost little mounds, little semicircles that come out from sort of top of the head, just randomly along the back of the dinosaur. So you can do these in any colour that you want. Again, I would almost go a little bit darker, just so that it stands out with your background. If your background's light, go darker. If your background's really dark, I would go a bit lighter, just so that you can see it. So for me, I'm going to make a darker shade of blue, quite a dark shade of blue, I think. So I'm going to wash off this brush just to get all of that green off it. And then I'm just going to mix up the colour now. So I'm still going to start with some white paint. And the reason why I do this is white paint helps make the paint a little bit more thick looking, so it doesn't go too see-through. If you use the paint straight out of the tub, sometimes it can look a little bit see-through, so it's always nice to mix up your own shade. So I've started with my white, and I'm just going to add a large amount of blue to this. I'm going to give it a mix and see what I get. And I've mixed it up next to the dish where I had the colour for my dinosaur's body, so I can see that I'm making a darker shade of blue. If you want to make a turquoise colour, you can always add a little bit of green to this, that might be nice. I'm just continuing to add the blue to this just to darken it up even more. And again, with this one, I'm not going to add any water to it. I want to go on quite thick with this paint. So I think I'm happy with that. So I'm now going to pop this paintbrush down, and I'm going to pick up one of my smaller paintbrushes again. I'll be using this to draw in these shapes. And I'll show you on mine, and then you can decide how you want to do it on yours. So with this paintbrush, which is quite pointy, I've just picked up some of that new colour. And I'm just going to start at the top of the back of the dinosaur's head here. And I'm just going to do a sort of semicircle going round. And I'm going to do that all the way down the dinosaur's neck. And then we can fill them in. So at the end, they look like this. And don't worry if you go over the line of your dinosaur, it works quite well. And I'm going to go over this a couple of times just to make sure that this is really thick and opaque. We can't see through it. So you can always start with one and then decide where you want them to go. Just be careful where you pop your hand. You don't want to smudge any of the blotches that you've already put. And these sort of semicircles might get a little bit bigger as they get down the dinosaur's back. You might want lots of them, or you might just want a few. Totally up to you. Just making them a little bit bigger as I get down the dinosaur's back. Once the paint dries, if you want to, you can then go back over and add another layer if you want to be really thick with this. When you're happy, you can just give your brushes a good wash. We're going to move on to adding in our last bit of paint work before we then move on later once everything's dried and use our felt tip pen. So what I'm going to do is I just want to create two white blobs, little circles at the top here for the eyes, and then what we're going to be doing is drawing over this. Now because I've gone for quite a cartoon style with this painting, I'm going to have the eye sort of floating half off the top of the dinosaur's head, which sounds very strange, but once it all comes together, it works quite well. So I'm just taking one of my smaller brushes, one of the ones with the pointy edges, and I'm just going to use some white paint for this. And I'm going to use the white paint in a really thick way. We want it to be nice and thick. So I'm just going to start by adding my first sort of circle, or oval, or egg shape, whatever you want it to be, just here. And as you can see, I'm kind of going over where the top of the dinosaur's head is. going to be our first eye. I'm then going to do the same thing next to it. So leaving a little gap. They don't need to be the same size or shape. We want our dinosaur to have lots of character. We're going to be outlining these with our pen afterwards. So what we want to do now is just make sure everything is nice and dry before we move on to the next bit. Next up is the dinosaur's mouth, and I'm just going to do a slightly curved mouth here with a smiley face. And then I'm just going to do a little curve here as well. Just nice and simple. Next up, we're going to go over to the eyes. I'm just going to do a circle around these white blobs we've already made. My pen ran out of ink, so I've just swapped to a different pen. I'm just doing this outline around the eyes. Again, we don't need to be too precise with this. We're doodling now. We want it to have a very cartoon-like effect, so no need to be too neat if you don't want to be. I'm now just going to do 2 eyebrows just floating on the top of the eyes. These are just little upside down U shapes. You can make them as thick or as bushy as you like. So to add the pupil, I'm just going to use my brush and I'm going to use a little bit of black paint just to do a nice splodge in the middle of the eyes. I've got my black paint here and I'm just going to add a small amount to my palette, and then picking up my tiny paintbrush, I'm just going to pick up some of this black paint. I just think it will work better being thicker. And I'm just going to place the eyeballs to one side as though the dinosaur is kind of looking backwards over his shoulder. And I'm being quite thick with this paint. You don't have to use paint, you can carry on using your felt tip if that's working for you. And if you want to add any extra detail, this is your moment to do so. So you might want to outline some of your splodges. You might not want to outline the whole thing, maybe just do half. You might want to do some zigzags, some circles. It's really up to you now what you do with your own painting. I would keep taking a little step back, just make sure you're happy. Sometimes it's a case of learning when to put down the pen or the paintbrush. And to finish off, I'm just going to do a couple of little tiny circles. I might not even fill in all the circles, but just dotted around the back of the dinosaur's body. Just tiny little circles, dots, swirls. Just for a little extra bit of detail, really. When you're happy with how your dinosaur is looking, this is your opportunity, if you want to sign your masterpiece. So you can do this anywhere that you like, maybe bottom right or left, or you could hide it somewhere within the dinosaur. If you've painted on a canvas, you could just pop your name and the date on the side. If you're gifting this to a lucky person, you could always put their name on it, but this is your chance to sign your masterpiece or date it if you want to. If you liked this video, then please do give us a little thumbs up and be sure to say hi in the comments below. We love hearing from you all. And if you haven't already, then subscribe to our channel because we bring you new art tutorials all the time so that you can get creative from the comfort of your own home. Thanks so much everyone, and see you next time.